Welcome back to the Home of Horror podcast.
What is cracking?
Must be a mutation, a freak of nature. The stories of the brutal murder.
Less is more. You want more brutality. I like the fog, I like the mist, I like both of them.
I'm not asking if you like both of them, dude.
Surely I made enough noise to awaken the dead.
And welcome back to the Home of Horror podcast. I'm your host, John. This is my co-host, Matt. Matt, say hi.
Schmello.
We got a doozy for you folks.
Always a doozy.
Always a doozy. It's crazy. We're here.
This one's actually a doozy.
This one's actually a doozy.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. We're here in the what we like to call the green room.
Mm-hmm.
It's very green in here.
Very green.
We've been working on the studio a little bit, trying to get it better for,
aesthetics.
Aesthetics. We want it a little bit better. We got the backdrop now. Doing the best we can here. We really do have an awesome episode for you guys today. We got to talk to New England archivist, filmmaker, and writer. His name is John Campopiano. He works for PBS and has produced independent documentaries, including Unearthed and Untold, The Path to Pet Sematary.
Which is unbelievable.
I'm sure a lot of people know what. If you're a fan of Pet Sematary, you know this documentary.
Yeah. And we're gonna talk a lot about it after the interview.
Exactly, and obviously during the interview.
Yeah.
Also, the upcoming Pennywise, the story of it as well, which is going to be huge. It hasn't released yet. He's also ventured into the world of narrative filmmaking with his first horror short film, GEORGIE 2019, which stars the original Georgie Denbrough from the original 1990 miniseries, and his new short documentary, Snapper, which comes out this year.
Yep.
Which is the reason we had him on. To talk about that specific documentary, even though
we got a little sneak peek.
We got a little sneak peek, which was nice, yeah. And so his writing on horror films and pop culture have been published in Delirium Magazine, Diabolique Magazine, Rue Morgue, Bloody Disgusting, iHorror, Dread Central, Mashable, The Wrap, MovieMaker Magazine, Scream Magazine, and of course
the big one,
Fangoria, which everybody knows. It was an awesome interview. We did it over Zoom, so obviously the video quality isn't fucking perfect, but it's really worth the watch, and we're glad to share that with
the
you
knowledge
guys.
that guy fucking has. He's a smart
Crazy
fucking dude.
man.
He knows what he's talking about.
And his work is everywhere.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
So let's get into it, man.
Yeah, sit back, have a drink, and enjoy.
Let's do it. Home of Horror, the Home of Horror podcast. Home of. All right, welcome back to the Home of Horror podcast. I am your host, John. This is my co-host, Matt. Matt, say hi.
What is cracking?
We have a very special guest today. John Campopiano is here with us. John, say hi.
Hey guys, John here. Thanks for having me.
Yep, very excited to have you on, man. And I think our listeners are going to be very excited as well, especially those in New England, obviously. So let's get right into it. If you could explain a little bit to everybody what it is you do and what you have done in the past here.
Yeah, sure. So I'm a filmmaker, writer, documentary filmmaker and writer, and also a media archivist. So my day gig is I work for PBS. I work in television and get to play with media, all kinds of different formats and stuff like that. And then on the side, I like to make films and write about films, and I've written for Fangoria and a bunch of other places, and that's kind of where my passion is. So
nice.
How do you find the projects that you want to do? Does it have to be something that really speaks to you, or is it, like the new one, Snapper, coming out? How do you find something like that?
Yeah, it's a mixed bag, man. It's like, sometimes the projects just kind of like find you, which sounds like a cliche, but it's true. It's with Snapper, I was interviewing the two filmmakers for something else. I occasionally write for Scream Magazine, which is in the UK. I'm one of their US-based writers. And so I was interviewing them about a different film they made back in the day called Attack of the Killer Refrigerator, which is as funny as it sounds. And at the end of that interview, they were like, because they know I'm a huge Jaws fan. They're like, we a bunch of years ago, we tried to make a movie about a killer snapping turtle. And I was like, that sounds rad. And I didn't really think of it again until a few days later, they were texting me photos that you saw in the film of the animatronic turtle they built and all this shit. And I was like, this is incredible. So I was like, we got to tell a story about it. And up until that point, I was used to making documentaries about films that, you know, are beloved films and are kind of cult classics. And I was like, man, that'd be interesting to make a film about a movie that never actually got made, you know? And so then my wheels just started turning, and that's kind of how it went. Yeah.
So that was a question I had too. So this film was never completely filmed. Is that correct?
Yeah.
It was just kind of some snippets here and there to try to get funding in order to
exactly.
To get it filmed.
Yeah, these guys had this idea to do like a Jaws ripoff about a man-eating snapping turtle, and they didn't have the budget to make the movie. So what they did was, well, maybe if we make a trailer for this movie, we could sell the trailer to a producer or somebody that would then finance the whole thing, and then they make the whole thing. And obviously, judging by the second part of the title of the doc, you know, the man-eating turtle movie that never got made, you can figure out that it didn't get made.
Right.
But the story of these guys and kind of their ambition and their, you know, their kind of DIY spirit of like garage filmmaking was just something that I thought was really cool. And I always figure like, if I think it's cool, maybe other people will think it's cool too. You know, it's kind of my leap of faith.
Yeah. And I think it really is cool because what your documentary did is make me want to see the film. Right. I was like, oh man, I really wish that there was something out there that we could watch because I was super intrigued by everything. And one thing me and Matt kind of went over when we were watching it was it's easy for someone to see like a kind of sort of cheesy film like us, like we review films, right? And like, it's easy to be like, oh, that movie looks shitty, or that movie, like that's not going to be good. But then you see something like your documentary and you see the process,
the blood, sweat, and tears that people put into this, you know?
Exactly. And it's like, you know, for, I think it was $8,000 that they had spent, is what you mentioned.
Yeah. In 1990, which was a lot more than it is now.
Right.
Yeah.
And they put it all on a credit card.
Yeah.
You know, so.
And it just gives you some perspective of how much goes into something like this and how cool it probably was for them to be like, oh man, this is so awesome. And then the depression of like, no one wants to pick this movie up. You know what I mean?
Yeah. To hear nothing back. I mean, it's tough.
Yeah.
And Scott Andrews, the guy who did all the props and stuff, I thought it was kind of cool that he still had the turtles and all that stuff.
Yeah.
31 years later.
Yeah.
I mean, on a film that never got made. So it's kind of.
Yeah. I know, it's cool. Yeah, I agree. I mean, and you know, the filmmakers will be the first to tell you that like they watch that footage and they're like, you know, it is what it is, obviously.
Yeah.
But I agree with you. I mean, I think, you know, in a lot of the film writing I do, I tend to write about, you know, more not obscure movies. That sounds like it's like, but like movies that maybe don't get a lot of attention. And some of them tend to be kind of like B movies or like, you know, schlocky cult movies. And, you know, they're not The Exorcist or Halloween, but I think that they do have merit, you know, and I think it's easy, like you said, it's easy to sort of write a review and spend like 10,000 words just shitting on a movie. That's easy. And as a reader, that's kind of boring. Like, I don't want to read that. Yeah. Like, tell me about these guys that really tried to make this. Maybe it didn't turn out the way they wanted. Maybe it did turn out to be a bad movie, but like, there's more to it than that, you know, and nobody sets out to make a bad movie.
Yeah, we were kind of talking about that too. Like, we talk about how much we hate critics, you know, and then we do the same exact thing.
We're kind of critics.
Right. Everybody has their own opinion. I mean, you know, so I get that, but. And
it just kind of, what your documentary does, like I said, is it gives you an idea of what these people go through and how really hard it is to do what they do. And it gives you that kind of like a new appreciation for, you know, some extremely cheesy movies or movies that really aren't supposed to be cheesy, but with what like, let's go into Attack of the Killer Refrigerator. First of all, I looked everywhere for the VHS.
Oh, dude, you're going to have to drop $300-400 if you can find it.
That was like the only thing I could find.
I don't even have a copy of it.
Yeah, super. But like they said, like people shit all over it. Obviously, oh, it's the worst movie ever. But try to go make that for $25. You know what I mean? Like, it's super hard. And like, so just a lot of blood, sweat, and tears go into these types of movies. And I think your documentary really points that out. And it's a really cool perspective to look at.
Oh, thanks. Yeah. Yeah. The funny thing about Snapper for me was like, I figured going into it that it was like, all right, this is going to be a movie about Snapper and, you know, we'll tell the story and it'll be cool. And then as we got into it, I was like, oh, this is actually kind of like a buddy story. Like in some ways, like their creative relationship over like decades, just trying to make cool stuff was kind of actually more of what the doc is about for me, like looking back on it, I mean, we tell that story through Snapper, but it's about like these guys just grinding, just trying to do stuff. They've got all these scripts and, they're just super creative. They're working on a sequel to Attack of the Killer Refrigerator right now.
That's awesome.
They've got a script written and they're doing the storyboards for it. So they're just like, just trying to make stuff. And that's what we're all trying to do. Right. Anyway.
Yeah.
Right.
So they're still making movies and stuff. They're still working.
Trying. Yeah. Yeah, they have their day jobs like kind of we all do, but they try to do this stuff on the side still like 30 years later, they're still like kids. So
if someone were to pick this movie up after seeing the documentary or whatever, if somebody were to pick this up, do you think they would go for CGI effects, or do you think they would kind of insist on that practical effect? Just getting a sense of how they are, you know what I mean? Because I feel like that was really heavy. I know at the time that was really all you had. For the most part.
I guess it depends on who picks it up. I mean, if like an Asylum picked it up or something, it would be, or like Sci-Fi or something, it would be CGI, but it'd be cool to see it. I mean, wouldn't that be wild if like the doc gets out, it plays festivals, and then like somebody like pays them, like they finally take the script all these years later and make Snapper. I mean, that would be like, what an ending to that story,
Right.
Oh yeah. And it would be filmed way better. I mean, their story would get across way better now than it did in the early 90s.
Yeah.
It would be so cool to see. I would really enjoy seeing that. And that was like 91, right?
Yeah, 90, exactly, yeah. 89, 90, right around there, yeah.
Yeah, and another cool thing that I liked going into like practical effects and stuff about the doc, I don't want to give too much away because I want our viewers to go see this or see it wherever they can. They show a lot of the prop tests and stuff like that. You get a lot of that. And like the drawings, the original drawings and stuff like that. And it's really cool to see, like, we really enjoyed the how they did the water and how,
in his bedroom.
Yeah.
Unreal.
Dude, really cool. And like, obviously you don't have the money to go film underwater like Jaws did. You're not Steven Spielberg, right? And it was just really cool. And the whole movie has like you said like a Jaws ripoff, and it kind of reminds me of like a Godzilla / like Piranha type feel with everything filmed on the beach. And it really, and you say it a little bit in the documentary where it's, it's very nostalgic for people to see those movies like on the beach and in the water, on lakes during the summer and stuff. That's like a huge hit with movies, especially like slasher movies with Friday the 13th and stuff like that. And I think that really gives like this whole, it gives a whole nother like viewership. Like everybody that likes that shit is going to go want to see something like that,
Yeah. Some of those formulas are always going to work.
Yeah.
So yeah, well, I'm glad you guys liked it. And we'll see what happens. We're working on getting a theatrical, an art house cinema here in the Boston area that wants to give it like a theatrical premiere virtually, obviously, because COVID, which will be cool. And then I want to try to get into some festivals. I think it's got pretty good festival potential, hopefully. So
so you obviously don't have a specific release date or anything like that. You're just going to
I want to just like play the festival circuit if I can. And I
think that's the way to go. I mean, especially now, a lot of the indie movies we see that do make it big are always hitting the festivals first. And it does way better. And then they get picked up by something. And like we were talking about we've done an episode on The Witch, huge New England folklore movie. And then we recently did The Lodge, which is another movie that hit festivals first and stuff like that. And I think people will really, it's not a long run time. It's kind of like a mini doc, right?
Yep, exactly.
But it does it justice. I think it's a perfect length. And is that hard for you? Even like 30 minutes of runtime for a documentary like this, is that really hard to put together?
I mean, it can be, especially when you're so close to the subject matter, like everything that you like. I watched the Pet Sematary documentary now, and I'm kind of like, I would do a lot of things differently, but I mean, that's just natural, I think. Because especially when you're so close to it, you're like, you love every second of the interviews. You're like, oh my God, this is great. Yeah. But it can't be like 9 hours long. I mean, you could do it, but I mean,
we would watch it 9 hours.
Yeah.
Maybe the
director's cut.
Yeah.
Director's cut. Yeah, there's a craft in there too of kind of like, they say like filmmaking is like killing your babies, like where you just have to cut stuff. Like you just can't, you have to craft it into something that is, is people have an appetite for. And especially if you want to go on the festival circuit, it's hard to do that. I think for me, I wanted Snapper to be like 10 minutes long before we started it. Okay. And then we got all this stuff. And then there's that spooky world element, which was like spooky world was huge back in this area back in the day, and all this other stuff. And then it was like, okay, well, there's stories about what happened to them after Snapper fell apart were interesting. So like, okay, we'll include that. So then suddenly it's like 30 minutes long, and it's like, oh shit, like it's not going to be 10 minutes, So it just depends on the story, I think. It depends on what it is.
Because Unearthed and Untold goes for like an hour and 40, I think. Roughly.
It doesn't even feel like that though. It's like I literally watched it and I was like, oh, I want to take notes on it. I have some questions, and then at the end I was like, oh shit, I didn't write anything down. I just watched the movie.
Did you did you stream it on Amazon? Which version did you watch? Was it the Synapse release or the?
I watched it on Tubi.
Yeah.
Oh, right on. Okay. Yeah.
Me as well. Yeah.
Cool.
I had texted him a few days ago and I was like, yo, man, it's on here. It's fucking awesome.
I'm glad it's on there.
Yeah, it's on there. I think you can watch it on YouTube as well.
Yeah.
And it is on Amazon, I think.
Yeah, and I think it's back on Shudder. It was on Shudder for like a year, and then the rights, like they rotate stuff out a lot, and then but someone tagged me on Instagram yesterday saying that it's on Shudder again. So I guess you can watch it on Shudder if you have a subscription.
Yeah, that's funny. I was watching it last night, and all of a sudden I had to pause, and I was scrolling through Instagram, and this girl's holding the Blu-ray of it. And she's like,
oh, really?
This documentary is fucking awesome. Like, everybody should check this out. And the main theme that everybody talks about with this, and I agree completely, I'm sure Matt would too, is that if you're a Pet Sematary fan, this adds to the movie, like a lot.
Oh, yeah.
A lot, especially being from Maine, where the documentary really focuses on Maine.
Definitely. Yeah.
And how it really is like a character within the film.
Yeah, the main character. I love that.
So obviously that makes us feel really fucking cool.
Yeah.
It's it was really cool to see, and
there's so much I didn't know, and I've seen this movie 25 times.
It's one of our favorites.
It's literally, from the time I was just a kid, it was one of the first horror movies I can ever remember watching.
Yeah, same here. Yeah.
And now seeing that, even with Judd's house, the way they built, the structure around.
Yeah.
I mean, it's unbelievable, and I'm actually going to Hancock tomorrow to see the Creed house for the first time in my life. So I'm going to take some pictures. I'm pumped. I'm going to look at the other house now. I would have never even known had I not seen your documentary. So it's so fucking cool.
Nice.
Yeah. Nice. And another thing too is like, people, there is some truth to this film. The documentary points out that, the Pet Sematary was a real thing.
Yeah.
The misspelling of the word is a real thing. And it's so cool to really hear that. And, you guys point out also that, Stephen King had his son almost run into the road.
Right.
And Route 15 is notorious in Maine for, actually, I think, just last year, someone died on the road because they ran out in front of a truck and they got hit. Like, it's still happening to this day. Mm-hmm. And you guys really, it's cool to see that, Stephen King, there's that one part where it talks about how the whole book the whole story flashed before his eyes when his son ran into the road of like how this could be an entire story. It's really brilliant, man.
It's unbelievable. Great job.
Oh, thanks, guys. Glad you liked it.
Another thing I wanted to ask too or talk to you about anyway, is there's really, and this goes with Snapper too, along with the path to Pet Sematary. I feel like New England, especially because of Stephen King, is so prominent in the horror like genre. Mm-hmm. His stories are so big and stuff like that, but you can't pitch a movie here.
It's hard.
It really is. Like, there's nowhere to go. You have to fly out to LA or New York or whatever. Nothing's ever really done here. Even most of King's work is done in like Toronto or Georgia and stuff like that. And it's such a shame, being from here where, there could be that revenue coming into the state, but it's so hard to get everybody here. And like, you don't get that natural landscape and stuff like that. Those beautiful views that like Pet Sematary has, like in the old blueberry field where the Micmac grave is and stuff like that. And it's like, how do you feel about that? I mean, that's probably one of the reasons that Snapper didn't get picked up is you got to send your whole story off and just hope for the best.
Right.
Yeah. And you got to, you're either in New York or LA. I mean, in terms of like Maine and stuff, right? That was like part of Pet Sematary getting filmed in Maine, right? It was like, you go back, you watch Cujo or you watch Salem's Lot, like all these movies that are set in Maine, but you see that coastline, you're like, dude, that's not Maine. Yeah. If you're from here, it's not Maine. It's the Pacific Northwest. It's Seattle. It's Vancouver. So he was probably just sort of fed up at that point. It was like, you're going to come and you're going to like shoot it here. And he made that a stipulation, and by then he was such a cash cow that they were like, yeah, whatever it takes to get this made. If you fine, we'll do it in Maine, I think with LA and the greater LA area, it's like you have desert, you have forest, you have ocean, you have all these different kinds of like landscapes all within a pretty close proximity. But New England, I mean, having done that drive like a dozen times, even from Boston to Bangor was like 4.5, 5 hours. And a lot of that drive is like, it's tough. It's just trees,
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah.
So like getting a crew and paying for that, there's no reason to, especially in Canada where, back in the day, they called Vancouver Hollywood North because everything went up there. That's why the miniseries was filmed up there. So much stuff was filmed up there because of the tax credit. It was cheaper, just everything, So it's a shame. It is what it is, but it's cool that, and I think part of Graveyard Shift was filmed in Maine after Pet.
Yeah. And
so
then
it's a shame, but
I think some of Thinner was filmed in Maine too.
Yep. Some of Thinner. And so, it's a bummer, but it's cool that was sort of like King putting his stake in the ground for Pet Sematary and being like, you got to film it. And I think that's partly why maybe it had such an impact because it's like the real place. There was no faking it. And I think Mary Lambert, who, George Romero was supposed to direct Pet Sematary and it would have been a totally different film. I'm sure it would have been great, but it wouldn't have, I don't think had the sort of like the emotional maybe impact or like this kind of the sentimentality that Mary Lambert had, and she came from the music video world. So she was visual. She still is, but she's a painter. She's still very visual. And I think that paid off. So she really took advantage of the landscape up in Maine and made it, I think why it was partly successful in my opinion.
Yeah. And I think if George did it, it would have been like a lot of Hollywood sets, probably stuff like that.
Yeah, just like more gore and maybe less of that family dynamic. I mean, not to cut him short, but I mean, that was his bag, right? So maybe it would have just been more that kind of thing. Same with the miniseries. I mean, he was supposed to direct the miniseries, and that didn't happen. It seems like all the projects I work on, George Romero was supposed to direct.
And it's
find out he was supposed to direct Snapper.
And it's weird to say because he's such a good director, but it's probably a good thing.
Oh, absolutely.
Especially with Stephen King films that he didn't do it. 'Cause obviously they did Creep Show together. I think both the Creep shows, right? So they were good. They were good friends, but it's probably for the better that he didn't. Because I don't think, I want to dive into this, and we don't talk about this very much.
Don't do it. Don't.
It's very taboo for this podcast. But the new Pet Sematary.
I was going to say the remake. We're talking. Yeah.
I don't acknowledge that was made.
I think that kind of shows you what maybe it could have been in the past, where it's these jump scares and this just no, because King's so good at, like, if you're going to do his story, there needs to be character development. You have to have, like in Pet Sematary, you have to have that Judd and Lewis connection, right? That's the story.
That's the crux,
right? That's what makes you care about these characters. And in the new one, just zero, none of that.
Yeah.
Horrible.
Yeah. And how do you ever replace Gwen? As great as Lithgow is,
Yeah.
You can't replace that. And I don't know.
Yeah.
It really was.
The story was, and that's not just to say that, like, they switched the characters of the Gage wasn't the one that died, which I get, that's fine, but it's not even that. It's the character development. There was no character I cared about, really.
Right.
And in the original Pet Sematary, I cared about all of them. The story is great, and it's really, really close to the book. I mean, the novel's probably my second favorite to it. And it's a very brutal novel. But the story is so good. And I think Mary did such a good job with capturing that character development, which you need to do, like I said, for Stephen King. Things like The Green Mile, Shawshank Redemption, Pet Sematary, all these movies, you need to have that connection in order to care. And then the story just rolls.
It helped that King wrote the screenplay too,
yes,
the original.
Absolutely.
Although some of the dialogue, there's some hokey dialogue in the original. I've still to this day never heard anybody say shilly shally the way Denise Crosby says it, but maybe that's a thing. I don't know. It's, I've always felt that I was always disappointed that, because Mary obviously directed the sequel, right? And I think some people don't realize that she directed the sequel. I wish they had gone back to Maine.
Yeah.
And I feel like
a budget reason, but
I feel like she went for a lot more shock factor in the second one too. There was, you know what I mean?
It was still pretty good though.
I love that movie.
Yeah.
I still love the second one. I wanted to ask you what you thought. Did you get a sense of what Mary had to cut from the funeral scene? Because I know when she talks about it in the documentary, she had to keep recutting to make everybody happy. When I was watching it, I was like, geez, I really wonder what really had to be cut out of there to make people happy.
I don't think much got cut. I mean, I think at one point they probably had like an open casket for Gage, and they probably felt that was too much. So the compromise was like the casket getting knocked over and then you see his hand.
Okay.
Which actually I think is probably more effective. It's because it's such like a little moment, and it, so, but I don't think very much. I think she really fought to keep a lot of that stuff.
Awesome.
And that's a really important scene in the novel and the book. Just part of the story. That's a huge scene because Rachel's father and Lewis get into it really hard, and it's a really intense scene. And I really like that part of the book.
I kind of wonder if that's like, I've always thought about like, Pet Sematary is not really up there with like the Halloween and the Friday. Like it's not up there, I don't think. And I don't know if that's because it's just too sad. Like if it's too cerebral, if it's too heavy in places that, like, at least when we were kids, I mean, I loved it as a kid, but I always felt that there was something kind of like really dark about it.
Absolutely.
It was different. I mean, it didn't have the body count as all the other slashers that, like, but still there was like a levity to those movies, like Friday the 13th and with Pet, it's just like, it's a slasher kind of, but it's just like so dark. And I wonder if that's what separates it from being talked about as like a,
Yeah, and I think it really makes, like, if you watch a slasher movies like Halloween and Friday and A Nightmare, they're good, don't get me wrong, but it doesn't give you that sense of like reality. Yeah. Where even in Pet Sematary, there's obviously the supernatural feel of the Wendigo and the burial ground and how it brings people back. But it still gives you the question as a person, if you had the chance, if you lose a loved one,
right,
and you had the chance, do you bring them back, right? And I think everybody, especially back in '89, I was born in '89, so, but I know when I first watched it, it gives you that feeling of like, you ask yourself that question, like, and you weigh the options, right? After watching the movie, you're like, oh man, I think I would do it. But then again, you see the consequences.
Yeah. And who hasn't lost a pet or a relative or a grandmother, or whatever it is, so it's relatable. Not all of us have been chased through the woods or stalked in an empty hospital, like Halloween 2, which is cool, but it is true. It's like you were invested in Gage at that point, but it wasn't just like another body, like a nameless victim. You cared.
And you guys point out in the documentary really, really well that, like, some of the people you interviewed said, it actually hit harder once they had kids.
Yeah.
It was like,
oh, everybody says that. Yeah.
Yeah. Once Gage died, if you have a kid, one of my friends said it as well. He was rewatching it on TV like last Halloween, and he's like, he had just had a kid, half a year before, and he's like, this hits way different now because I have a son now, and I can't even picture that happening. I don't want to picture that happening.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
It's truly a terrifying story, I think.
One of the greatest movies ever made.
Yeah,
honestly, and horror movies ever made, in my opinion. Probably my favorite Stephen King movie.
Yeah, and your documentary, dude, does it so much justice.
It really does.
It's so cool.
Oh, thanks, guys. That's good to hear. You lose perspective working on this stuff, and you're like, "Is this any good?"
Bet.
You don't even really know, So,
well, I'm sure
all these
you're
years
just
later too. So it's cool that it's because it's been out for a while. So I'm glad people are still finding it.
Yeah, and I'm sure you're pouring through the data and the information while you're making it, and it's kind of probably feels a little bit like more of a job than it does,
Well, it was like
dream.
an accident. It was an accident, man. I mean, because we live in New England, it's close enough to get to Maine. That part of Maine. And so me and Justin went up as fans. We're like, let's go check out the locations like you're doing tomorrow. We're like, let's go see the Creed house. Let's go check out these locations. And once we were up there, we met somebody. They saw us snooping around. And they're like, oh, we got to talking. And they're like, oh, if you're interested in Pet Sematary, you got to go down the street to so-and-so because they were an extra. And then this person was like a grip, worked on the crew. And you talk to that person, they're like, oh, I've got a photo album in my basement of photos I took on the set that nobody's seen. So like 4 or 5 trips later, going back up to Maine, we were like, oh man, like maybe we'll do a video for YouTube. At that point, we were like, let's do a video for YouTube of the locations. And then the more we dug into it, the more we're like, oh, maybe we have something more than that. And literally we realized it was a documentary when we were like halfway done with it. It was never the plan to make a documentary. I never had ambitions to make films as a kid, really. I mean, I dicked around with a camera like we all did with our buddies, but
yeah.
I made a movie about a killer sock when I was like 12 years old. I don't think it's going to get the Criterion release anytime soon. But
I think Snapper's probably first, then the killer sock.
The sock. Yeah. So, but that's where it went. So, and then we had a doc, really, and we knew that it had to be about Maine, because that's such a big part of the story.
Yeah,
and so many of the people involved are from Maine, as you know from seeing.
Yeah, of course.
That it just felt essential, and so in those years we got very close with people in Hancock, and we had screenings up in Ellsworth. They have a really cool little indie theater on Main Street in Ellsworth, and we showed the film there a couple times and had some cast come with props, and it was like a big event. It was a lot of fun. We showed it a couple of years ago at down in Bucksport, the Northeast Historic Film Archive. They've got like a killer screen there, and we sold it out, and it's been fun. So I think people in Maine that have seen it when we've been there for screenings, they like seeing Maine on the screen, and they like seeing people from Maine talk about Maine. And
absolutely,
they want to hear about Judd's, Fred Gwynn's shitty Maine accent, and like they love hearing that stuff.
Oh yeah, yeah. It's because we love it too, so I totally get it.
Yeah.
And I know Matt. I'm gonna kind of steal this question from Matt just so we get it in. Did you guys reach out to Stephen King at all?
Yeah, we did. And it's a heartbreaking story. I'll tell you the short version.
Oh man.
I had gotten the. Do you remember in the documentary? There's an older gentleman. He's a Maine author who's like one of the coolest dudes ever. His name's Sandy Fippen. Yep. He's kind of like the historian in the documentary. And he's known Steve for a long, long time because he's an author too. And so at one point I said, Sandy, you got to help me get to Steve because we can't, how do you get to him? He's like untouchable.
Yeah.
And so he gave me the address of their summer home, Tabitha and Steve's summer home in Maine. I don't know. I don't think they still use it because it was Tabitha's father who was living there, and they used it as a summer home, and he has since died. So I think they're in Florida now most of the year. But anyway, so he's like, write Steve there because it'll break through all the bullshit. It won't, it won't get weeded out by his assistant. So I wrote him this letter. Said, we're doing this documentary. I'm in touch with Sandy and blah, blah, blah. Will you please be in this documentary? And so 3 weeks later, I get an email from one of his assistants up in Bangor, and she said, Steve got your letter and he'd love to give you an interview for the documentary. So you can imagine we're like walking on air for like 2 weeks. She said, once his primary assistant is back from vacation, she'll set it up. And his primary assistant, who has since retired, is a very nice woman, but she's really tough. Yeah. She kind of calls the shots. Like, she determines what's worth his time and what's not. So she came back from vacation, and you can probably guess what her reaction was to giving us an interview for the documentary. It was, actually, he's not going to be available to give you an interview.
Damn.
So we were like that close, man. We were like that close.
I wonder if he would, I wonder if he would have seen it now, if he would have been like, you know what, just himself, if he would have been like, you know what, I totally should have done at least, a 5-10 minute interview.
Well, with the Pennywise coming out, maybe there's another chance.
Yeah, that would be awesome. And you guys get Tim Curry for that, right? I mean,
we did, yeah.
That's big too.
That's awesome.
You get most of the losers in there.
Blu-ray.
Yeah,
we sent Steve a Blu-ray of the Pet doc, so he has seen it. And he and his attorney gave us the green light that, like, because it's his property. I mean, it's Paramount, but it's King. And so he said it's great. He said we did the state of Maine justice, which was great to hear. And we knew that meant that he wasn't going to sue us, so that was cool too.
Yeah, that's nice. And that's even better.
It worked out. Yeah.
Well, yeah. I guess even just getting the okay is probably pretty cool. That's probably some satisfaction there.
Exactly. And there's that footage in the very beginning of the doc where he's giving like a live talk on stage.
Yeah.
So we were invited as press to go to that, to film for the documentary. He gave us the green light to film it and use it. So he was cool. I've got nothing bad to say, but yeah, man, we were so close to getting him in the doc, and it didn't happen.
Man, what do you stinks. That would have been so cool.
Well, it's not over yet, man. Just, still a chance.
We could get him.
Absolutely.
Maybe he wants to talk about turtles, and we could get him for Snapper.
So diving into the Pennywise documentary coming out, the story of it. Yeah. I watched the trailer. I've seen the artwork for the covers and stuff, which is really fucking cool.
Yeah, what the hell's taking so long? Anyway, I'm just kidding.
Did you guys? Did you guys see some? Obviously, some. Did you guys slow down because of COVID and stuff, or just post-production stuff, or more interviews?
Yeah, just post-production stuff, man. It's so hard. I mean, as you guys know, you're doing this podcast, so you get it. Yeah. It's like day job, family. It's hard to do it all.
Absolutely.
So it takes a long time. It is kind of what it is. I think, we've had people say things like, but how long did it take Muschietti to get his out? It's like, yeah, but guys, he's a full-time filmmaker.
Of course.
He
made millions.
Yeah. It's a different animal, So it's been a combination of COVID and just it takes a while. And my team, everybody's in the UK, so there's always we're on different channels a lot of the time, and we're all working on other projects. So it's hard to it's hard to kind of like really buckle down, but it's coming. I'm looking at cuts every day, and it'll be this year for sure.
Sweet.
For sure.
And you guys get most of the losers in there, I think. And
everybody except Jonathan Brandis, obviously, because he's gone. But everybody. Yeah.
That's awesome, man. That's so cool. And you also did a short film called Georgie.
Yeah.
Which I watched. That was really cool. The original Georgie Denbro's in there.
Yeah. And one of the losers too.
Yes. Yeah, he's the runner, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Now, do you have any other? Do you feel like you want to make more films that are actually story based and not documentaries, or do you have any?
Not really. I don't really have that interest. Yeah. I mean, the thing with Georgie was when we were interviewing Tony Dakota, who played Georgie in the miniseries. One of the things we asked him was, would you ever want to get back into acting? Because he hasn't acted since like 91 or 92, and he's had a lot of personal problems that have kept him from acting. So he was like, I just don't have any idea how to get started again. Like, I don't know how to get my foot in the door. So I had messaged my buddy Ryan, who's a filmmaker out in Seattle, who I did Georgie with. And I said, dude, what if we wrote like a short film for Tony? Raise some money, gave him, we didn't make any money on it, but give him a bunch of money to kind of help him out financially, and give him something creative, positive to do, get his foot in the door, get him in front of the camera again, basically.
Yeah.
So that's how Georgie came about, and we wrote it. But that was kind of like a weird way of getting to a narrative film, like a fictional piece. And it was really fun. I mean, I'm used to documentaries where it's kind of like, you know, you have a story you want to tell, you interview people, and then the story is in there, right? I mean, then you find the story. It's kind of like archaeology. I always think about it like you're going in there and you're dusting. It's like you find the story. Yeah. But with like a story you write, it's like, dude, whatever. Like, let's put a dragon in it. Fuck it. Let's put a Georgie's riding a camel. Like, we could do whatever we want, you know? And so that was kind of cool to just have a blank canvas and be like, oh man.
Yeah, that's pretty.
But sweet. I like telling stories. I don't know. I kind of like, I think documentaries is kind of like more my thing. You know?
And obviously being, you know, dealing with archives and stuff, you're kind of, I'm guessing you're into history and stuff like that, obviously.
Huge.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
and
that makes sense.
And stuff that people have never seen before, you know, like in the Pet Sematary documentary, there's that like home movie footage of Fred Gwynn shooting that scene outside with Denise Crosby and Dale. Yeah. And when we found that this woman had like a VHS tape in her basement, I mean, dude, it's like a rush. It's like a high, knowing that like, holy shit, you're unearthing something that like nobody's seen before. And I'm like, if I'm pumped, like other people are going to be pumped, and like we want to show people. And like same with Snapper, it's like all this amazing footage, and photos of the stuff that these guys were building in like Worcester, Massachusetts, like. So the idea of kind of like resurrecting that stuff and putting it into a film is like kind of what I get off on, you know?
Yeah, that's awesome, man.
Yeah.
Do you have a favorite horror movie? I mean, if somebody were to put you on the spot like I am right now, they said, what's your favorite horror movie? Or just, you know, a go-to, I guess. You know, what?
Jaws, for sure.
Jaws, yeah.
Because for me, it has everything. It's got humor. It's got like excitement and adventure. It's got the gore. It's got like everything. You know, it's a good adventure story.
So you consider it a horror movie?
Yes. With a lot of people have this argument.
Okay, fair enough.
Where it's not a horror movie.
I do consider it a horror movie, even though it has an adventurous side, and most of the score is kind of adventure style. You know?
Yeah.
To me, it's
that's fair. That's fair. It could be. Yeah, I don't know. I don't.
It's a killer in the water, right? It's a serial killer.
We've had this conversation a lot of times.
Oh, really? So where do you stand on it? Is it a horror movie or not so much?
He's on the fence.
I'm on the fence. It's the worst place to be.
Because it straddles. That's why.
It truly does straddle. I mean, you can look at it as a horror movie for sure. And you can look at it as, you know, it's an action movie or a adventure.
Well, let me redeem myself. It's my favorite movie, regardless of the genre.
Okay.
Nice.
Awesome.
And I think because it does have everything, but also, you know, because I grew up going to the Vineyard to see where the locations were. Yeah. You know, I mean, Martha's Vineyard is an hour and a half from where I live. So you go there and it's Amity Island. I don't know if you guys have been, but it hasn't changed much. I mean, islands tend to not change very much by design. And so you go there and it's like, dude, that's where Quint's shack was. You recognize the horizon. You recognize Main Street in Edgartown where Chief Brody's wall. I mean, it looks the same.
That's awesome.
And so for me, that was a big part of like being super into the movie, that it was like, man, this is my backyard, you know?
Yeah, that's cool.
So Jaws is one of them for sure. I don't know. I got a bunch, man. Exorcist, all the classics. I mean, in terms of horror.
Thank you so much for saying that.
That's both of our favorite horror movies of all time.
Yeah. I mean, it's unbelievable.
It's truly terrifying.
Yeah.
And I think because it gets lost in the mix, because especially people either my age or younger want a lot of, if you're the average horror fan, you want jump scares and
there's too much dialogue. People say there's too much dialogue. There's too much build up to it.
Like,
you know,
that is the build, man. The build is what you want, you know?
That's part of the scare. Yeah, exactly. There's a movie, I don't know if you guys know it. Again, it's a slow burn, but it's called Let's Scare Jessica to Death, which is a film that I love.
I don't think I've ever heard of that.
Shout Factory just put it out last year, and I did a little special feature work for them, but it was shot in Connecticut, so just south of where I'm at. And it's really atmospheric. It's from 1971. It's a little bit early, but it's beautifully shot, and like kind of like The Exorcist, the scares are really in the atmosphere that they build. You know, it's not in a lot of the jump stuff.
Oh, we'll have to check it out.
Yeah, definitely.
Check it out for sure. It's cool. It's a cool film. Yeah.
And yeah, man, this has been fucking awesome.
Yeah, it's been great chat.
Do you have anything you want to plug or promote?
Or anything in the works?
Yeah, anything in the works that you have, or
future projects?
So Snapper has kind of been my main deal. I'm working with, you can check it out on Facebook. One of the subgenres of horror that I've been like a huge fan of over the years, and I've collected a lot of movies and stuff, are like eco horror. So like animal films, like animal attack horror films. And so I'm working with a filmmaker, actually an author down in Australia, on a new documentary, feature-length documentary about the history of animal attack horror. So like from the 40s to the Birds to Jaws, Grizzly, you name it. And so we're sort of starting a pitch to get that like up and running and get that funded. And so there's a Facebook page for that if you want to check it out. There's more info and stuff. Honestly, I'm kind of excited I've got a couple ideas for some more short docs like Snapper. And I kind of imagine maybe like turning it into like a little bit of like an anthology or like a trilogy about like different films that either are kind of lost altogether. Or films that like didn't get finished. There's a movie called Chameleons, which I'm a really big fan of. That's kind of like been lost with time. It's from 1990, and it kind of it's kind of like a Gremlins. So it's like kind of like black humor, kind of like horror. And there's some movies out there like that I'm trying to like, I want to sort of like tell those stories in like short doc form. So, COVID makes everything more complicated. So we'll see what that's like getting those projects started. But, yeah, working on that, man. Just, yeah, I think this year I'm going to just really try to get Snapper kind of out in the world and see if I can get into some festivals and get some excitement for it. You know, short films are tough because it's hard to market them. You know, like with the Pet Sematary documentary, we played it at the Rhode Island International Horror Film Festival, and there was a distributor there kind of scouting out films, and he got in touch with us afterwards, and that's how the distribution deal came about. But with short films, it's tough, you know, because like you're not going to really sell a Blu-ray of like a 25-minute film.
True.
So it's not as obvious like where those will land. But you know, for me, I just want people to see it and like it and be like, oh, that's cool. I would never have known that story otherwise. And
it's like a little known legend of horror, you know. That's
yeah, and like,
cool. I like that idea.
And like regional horror, you know, like, you know. I don't know anything about like Massachusetts horror films from the 90s. I mean, who does, right? I mean, but there's stories there. And I feel like if some of us don't tell those stories, then they just disappear. And that sucks, you know? So
yeah, for sure.
So yeah, man. So we'll see. I like the short form stuff. You guys should check out. This is like a selfless plug. I apologize. You can cut this out.
Oh, absolutely not. Go ahead.
I did a short film for PBS. I work for PBS, but I did a short film for American Experience, which is like a history-based show that PBS airs. It's like where Ken Burns puts a lot of his documentaries and stuff like that. But it's about a sea serpent hoax that happened on Nantucket back in the 30s. Oh, and it's like an 8-minute short film.
That's cool.
But I think you guys would dig it. There's some really cool footage in there. And I'll send you the link if you want to check it out.
Absolutely.
But it's kind of like a trend I'm discovering that like a lot of my work seems to be sort of like New England centric, you know? And I'm very cool with that, you know?
Yeah, absolutely, man.
What were your thoughts on The Witch?
I loved it.
I loved it too.
So good, man.
I loved it. I went to the premiere down here in Boston where Eggers was at, and so he gave a talk afterwards and stuff, and I loved it, man.
So good. It was set up like a play almost. Like you could do that on stage. I feel like it was so good, man. The story was great, and just that time period, like those period pieces are super interesting to me. I go down to Salem every year. To join in the festivities and stuff. Obviously this year I couldn't make it, but
yeah, I think I was going to say that earlier when you mentioned like why New England is so like, I think it's because we have places like Salem and we're just steeped in folklore and tradition.
So old.
And there have been some movies. Do you guys know a film called The Good Son with Macaulay?
Great movie.
So a lot of that was
Elijah Wood.
Yeah. A lot of that was filmed in an area like Marblehead, Massachusetts, and like the really old parts of near Salem.
Yeah. That's a great movie, man. Macaulay Culkin is so good, and so is Elijah Wood. I mean, both of them are great in that.
Dude, it's crazy when you think that he did that in between Home Alone 1 and 2. And the producers were pissed.
Night and day. It's crazy.
Yeah, the Home Alone producers were not happy because they were trying to sell a certain Macaulay Culkin.
Oh yeah.
And a murderous Macaulay Culkin was not really like what they were.
They don't want him to have lines like "Don't fuck with me."
Right.
Yeah, it doesn't fit the brand. You know?
No. Anyway, man, very happy to have you on. Make sure you send us any info about Snapper.
I will, yeah.
And we'll push it. We'll push it to the end, man.
I think next week we're gonna know what the premiere deal is.
Okay, so make sure you send us any information. You have my email, obviously.
Yeah.
You can hit me up on Instagram. You know that. And also, when this Pennywise doc gets going, or any other project you have going, man, we'd love to have you on again.
Absolutely.
And talk about this stuff. So definitely let us know.
Will do. Maybe we get some of the losers on too.
Dude, that'd be so awesome, man. We would love that.
That would be awesome.
We could do that for sure.
All right, cool, John, man. I appreciate it.
All right, brothers. Thanks. I appreciate it. Good to meet you. Thanks.
Nice to meet you.
Absolutely. We'll be in touch.
All right, guys. Cheers.
All right. See
Cheers.
ya.
Awesome.
And there you have it, folks.
Hell of an interview.
Dude, so good, man.
Honestly, the dude knows what he is talking
so
about.
informative, and just I would love to just like
pick his brain for another hour or so.
Like he said, we could, we talked to him after. We could have gone on for hours, man.
Yeah.
Just shooting the shit. And I would love to get in a room with him and just, have a fucking cigar and just like talk shit about horror. He really knows what he's talking about. He's very informative. And being an archivist and kind of a historian himself, like he's just really interested in because
behind the scenes type of shit.
Yeah.
Just the stuff you don't see every fucking day.
Exactly. Yeah.
And when we were talking about Snapper, you root for these guys.
Exactly.
And we fucking talked about it a little bit, being critics and really shitting on, especially me, when it's a fucking, because you love shitty movies.
I do.
You fucking love shitty fucking movies.
I do.
Like The Bay.
And I love them. I like The Bay, but that's a shitty movie in a different way.
Right.
That's not like where.
Yeah, but we don't know what they went through to make it.
No,
if we
true.
did, maybe I'd like it more.
No, but
you know what I mean.
I think but I think The Bay is like just like a shitty movie because they still had a pretty big budget.
Right.
What I like in shitty movies is like popcorn movies. Like I like the movies because they're like. Some of the shit you can tell is like just done wrong. Right. Or the plot isn't all that fucking cool, right? Like there's holes and everything.
Yep.
I like the fun of that.
Yep. You like when blood's splashing up on somebody and you can tell it's somebody just with a bottle like
exactly
them,
like I mean? It's like the camera
cheesy,
right on them.
Right. Yeah.
Well, just stuff like that. And I really like cheesy movies that are very good, like have a good narrative, have a good plot. Right. But they just didn't have
the financial backing behind it.
Exactly. And that's what Snapper is about.
Absolutely.
Pretty much.
Yeah. No, absolutely.
And what's really cool about it is it's, it talks about how, that it's just so hard to get funded. Right. And it's so hard to push your dream out there. And like these guys did everything they possibly could.
Yeah. Blood, sweat, and fucking tears. Literally blood, sweat, and tears.
And we had talked, we talked about a little bit earlier how like, $8,000 today, even though it's not as much money, would get you way better quality of production, effects, shit like
your phone.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, literally the quality of video that you could get today.
Yeah,
is leaps and bounds what you could have gotten.
Like I would like to try it just to compare. Maybe one day me and you will take our phones and we'll try to make something on our the production qualities that we have for this show, right? And see what we can do. And I bet we don't spend a cent except for maybe some fake blood and shit like that. Right. But more people will see that. Say we made a movie and put it on YouTube. I mean, more people will see that than will ever see Snapper because it will. It was early '90s. Right. It'll never be seen.
And like the thing we didn't really realize going into Snapper was that it wasn't a full movie. They didn't make the full movie. They were making a trailer to be picked up by somebody who would give them the financial backing to make what they wanted.
And that's still $8,000.
$8,000 fucking dollars that they put on a credit card.
Yeah.
I mean, they weren't even. They took every cent they fucking had,
which they probably paid off for years, if I would have to guess.
Right.
I mean, we don't want to give too much away about the documentary. We want people to go see it. It's a mini doc. It's like 30 minutes, which we got into with him too. How
it was supposed to be a 10-minute documentary.
Yeah, yeah. And there's just so much you can dive into with that. Right. That archivist and historian background that he has, where he did a really good job explaining about it's almost like I think of it as like a dinosaur bone, right? Like it's something you uncover and then you keep sweeping.
You unearth.
You keep unearth. Yeah.
Right.
Unearthed, you keep sweeping and you keep cleaning and you get more of the story,
right?
And you always come up with something that's more than what you thought, and that's what gives you the drive and the the feeling to keep doing so.
Right, and you almost you're rooting for these guys. I said that before, but the camaraderie and the brotherhood that those two had,
absolutely.
It's like they'd meet in a hotel lobby, for once a week or every day.
Or even just at their apartment.
Right.
Like
At their apartment, and they'd write. They just have a meal and they'd write. And they're still writing. And they're still trying to get things made. And they're still trying to get Snapper made to this day.
Yeah. And there's something to that. Like we talked about John with Attack of the Killer Refrigerator.
Right.
Horrible. Like just little $25 story that these guys came up with, right?
Right.
But like we talked about, I tried to find the VHS everywhere.
Yeah.
The only place you can find it is on like eBay for like $400.
Right.
So there's something to these little stories that people find nostalgic, and there's something to, just if you're a collector like I am, if you follow my Instagram, New England HOH, just plug
Shameless plug.
Shameless plug. You know that I love collecting things, and even if it's the shittiest thing, if it's not something you can find everywhere, that's
right.
a reason to have it.
Right.
And that's why these stories matter.
Well, how many of these stories are out there?
Oh my God.
You know what I mean?
Dude, I can't even imagine.
More of those stories out there than the, feel good story of the guy who came from nothing and made it.
Exactly.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Obviously. I mean, everybody loves to talk about those stories. There's so many people still out there grinding to this day who have been making films like this since the 80s, in the 90s, before then.
Oh, of course.
I mean, before then.
And it reminds me of like, when you go to the bonus DVD specials of like whatever movie it is, it could be a big budget one, and you watch the deleted scenes or you watch the behind the scenes, right?
Right.
Of like how the movie was made, that type of thing. That's on like every DVD now, especially if you get like a
special edition,
Blu-ray, collector's edition. You get all that. That's like those little bits and pieces, but just way bigger of a story because the story's lost. Right. And people like John are uncovering those stories. Yeah. And it's super important because besides the only thing that's different, like Pet Sematary, I didn't know this story. Yep. This was a brilliant thing where, I love Pet Sematary, so do you. Yep. And I think a lot of people do, but it's not a movie like Halloween. No, or A Nightmare on Elm Street.
And that's why the movie almost never got made. And you learn all this stuff because of his documentary.
Exactly. But if I watch the behind the scenes and how a movie was made on a big budget movie, I might get some tidbits. I might get some little things here and there that are cool to learn. Just through the internet and social media, I know most of the stories. Right. But from something like Snapper or Unearthed and Untold, and I'm hoping we see with Pennywise the story of it.
Oh, I'm sure that's going to be, that's going to be.
You get most of it, but like with stuff like this, it's a whole story that you never would have known at all. Yeah. Like with Snapper, I feel like I've seen the movie almost. Or what it does that I explain in the interview that we had with John is I want to see more. Yeah. That's how crazy that is, right? Like,
yeah, and they still want it to get picked up.
I mean, and if you can get enough people to watch John's documentary here, just 30 minutes of your time. Right. 30 minutes of my time made me want to see an entire feature film of this rip-off of Jaws.
As cheesy as it may be.
Yeah, rip-off of Jaws, of Piranha in the 70s. Yeah. Even that Godzilla feel of like, the toxic waste and stuff like that.
So what were your thoughts? I mean, I asked John about it as if they did get picked up by somebody, if they would go with CGI or would they try to insist on practical effects. I felt like just the sense I got, I didn't sit down with them obviously or anything, but just watching them, the way they interact with each other, the relationship they had with the special effects guy. Yeah. I feel like they would want to bring him back. They would want to get the band back together.
Yeah, I think there's certain kind of like the new It movie that we had talked about a little bit, where there is CGI and then there's practical effects. But I think they would go the reverse, and you would lean heavily on practical effects. Certain CGI, where they're we spoke a little bit about how, and if you watch the documentary, you see a lot more of them trying to do scenes that are like in the water.
Right, they couldn't do it.
Which you couldn't do it, but nowadays they could have done that.
Right,
and
there's an app for that, I'm sure.
Oh, I'm sure.
You know what I mean? I'm sure they can download an app.
Even just like the tips and tricks that people use now, they probably could have. But just an underwater camera now. You know what I mean? They probably didn't have that back then that you could rent that for that amount of money, that would look good on film, especially how grainy things were in the 90s. So just stuff like that would have made it better. But I think they would have, there's still time. There's still a thing out there where you can do practical effects and make it awesome, especially with horror, where
I think we've gotten away from it too much.
That's what I'm saying. I think fans want it more back. You know what I mean? And you get those little things, and sometimes it obviously looks not as real, but at the same time, CGI can look so fake, you just know it.
It almost ruins some movies.
Yeah,
I mean, truly. I mean, even going back to The Mist with Stephen King, when the tentacles are coming into it's like,
if you would have made rubber,
you can do that,
and you would have flailed those around, it would have. Maybe I don't believe it, but it looks way cooler. It looks way better, and just as a fan, I'm way more intrigued at how they did it, the backstory, 100%. That kind of thing,
100%.
And I want to get a little bit into Unearthed and Untold here.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I want to.
I mean, this is a documentary that I don't think we really have to explain to people. I think a lot of people have seen this more than we, more than we think. Obviously, I wanted to get John on for Snapper because I was very intrigued by that. But obviously, I mean, this is a pride. This is a pride and joy right here.
As a couple main kids,
exactly.
I mean, the main character in Pet Sematary, it's very clear. I mean, he talked to the actors. He talked to Mary Lambert.
Exactly.
He talked to everybody. Yeah. Everybody said Maine was the place to do it. You couldn't have done this anywhere else.
It's almost a character in itself.
It's a character.
You have to have the scenic the scenery and everything has to feel like Maine in order for the film to work. That's why I don't want to say it, but that's why the new one didn't work. Right?
I don't even want to talk about that.
But it's true. That's why the new one didn't work. It was
too Hollywood.
Yeah.
It was too Hollywood.
No character development, which you need for a Stephen King
film. And we talked to John
film.
about that a little bit, where how do you replace Gwen? How do you replace that?
You can't.
You don't. I mean, that's
so there's no reason to remake that movie unless if you're going to go back to the roots of it.
Right.
Like I want Stephen King writing the screenplay.
Go back to the Creed house.
Yeah, I want I want the same scenes, like scenery. Right. I want the same house. I want the same cemetery. Yeah. Like I don't want, in the new one where the kids are wearing the masks and like hitting drums and shit. That's such a it feels so ritualistic, which the first movie didn't, and the story doesn't feel that way.
Right, exactly.
It feels like this backyard.
If that was in the story, fine. Yeah. Then they went a different route and they changed some things to go more with the novel, whatever. It wasn't.
No.
I mean, the cat was... Well, the cat was closer.
Yeah, the cat was closer. That's about it.
Okay.
It was a Maine Coon cat.
I don't give a fuck about the cat.
Makes sense, I guess. But
I like Church better.
That's a very minute part of the story that doesn't need to be told. That's the type of things that they were like, okay, we can get by with that.
Right.
And those are the things they made prominent in the new one that didn't really matter.
It didn't matter. And most people don't know that's close.
It's the character development. It's the relationship between Judd and Lewis. Yeah. Those are the things that matter. And that's what this documentary really points out. The story of it, the plot, the setting, those types of things. That's what John really points out in this, and obviously his entire team did a great job.
Right.
And
man, I thought watching it, and I've seen Pet Sematary 100 fucking times. You know, I don't know how many times I've seen it. And we talked about it before. One of the first movies I remember growing up watching as a kid. Pet Sematary. Yeah, made me fall in love with horror. I know that. And then, like recently, went out, saw the Creed house and all that stuff, and it's just a little house across the road. And when you actually see the documentary.
It's the
that
same.
they built a house around
the little ranch house.
a little ranch
It's
to
so
make
cool,
it look
man.
like an old Victorian house.
Yeah.
You would never know that.
No, most movies now you get the studio lot,
You get studios, right?
and then there's a bunch of green screens.
Right.
No offense to the green room here.
Right.
But yeah.
Absolutely. And there's just little tidbits. Man, Maine is fucking awesome.
Yeah.
And that just showcases Maine. And maybe that's why I love it so much.
Of course.
But there's so much good information.
Well, I think that's how everybody feels when they have a film actually created in their hometown, and just even about it, you know.
Yeah.
We don't get that very often.
No, we don't.
Obviously, the new resurgence of King's work has helped us, you know, with it and some of the newer ones coming out.
Right, and it's unbelievable that Pet Sematary almost didn't get made.
I know.
I mean,
Crazy.
in the first 30 seconds of the movie, you realize that they'd been pushing Pet Sematary.
Yeah.
They wanted Pet Sematary to be made. And the only reason it got made was because of a fucking strike.
Exactly.
You know, writers were on strike, so they needed movies that didn't need any rewrites, that were ready to shoot, ready to go. And that's the only fucking reason it got made.
I know, which is...
How insane is that?
I know, it's so crazy, man.
I mean, and then the money this movie made...
Yeah.
It's unfucking real.
But what his documentary does great, and what this whole podcast, this episode, I think, has been about is, you know, the importance of New England in the horror genre, especially when it comes to Stephen King's work.
Yep.
But not only that, to John's documentaries, to his filmmaking.
Yep.
These stories that you can go to and really understand because you're from here. And I know all of our listeners aren't.
Right.
But that's okay. Like, I encourage you to go out and find
your local
stuff and give them a chance, you know, your local filmmakers, give them a chance. The little stories that they have about your town, that kind of stuff, you know, and
it hits close to home.
It does,
and it makes
man.
you feel a different way
so
when you
cool,
see
man.
these things.
And I just think it really points out what his work does is really point out what New England means to the horror genre. I mean, take all of Stephen King's work out of the horror genre. And I mean, there's still a genre, but it's a lot of slashers and no King's work means you don't get
character development,
especially
I won't say any character but he changed.
Yeah, you don't get what King does best.
As far as our generation,
what King does best, it is put real people in unreal situations. That's what he does best, and that's why you care about the characters so much. That's why the story's so good.
And he writes about what he knows.
Exactly.
I mean, and John talks about it in the movie.
Yeah.
He writes about what he knows. He has interviews with people.
And he tried to get him on.
We talk
about that a little bit.
Cool little story there.
Yeah. So
I mean, not cool, but...
Not cool. Wish it could have been cooler. It is cool. Wish it could have been cooler.
Right.
But yeah, overall,
I'm
man,
very confident that John is going to sit down with Stephen King at some point.
At some point, absolutely.
At some point, he's going to sit down in a room with him.
And if there's
like
anything we can do to help that, you know, pushing his work, even just to the average fan out there, that's what I want to do. You know?
Absolutely.
Because I was very happy to have him on and just take some time out of his day to do that.
Yeah, he's a busy guy.
Yeah, and I just had a blast, man.
Yeah, me too.
Cool,
Cheers,
man.
John.
Hey,
cheers, John. Thanks.
Cheers. Thank you to everybody listening out there. Follow us on Instagram, New England Home of Horror. That's New England HOH. You can follow Matt here at To Kill a Monster. That's the number 2, Kill a Monster. Follow us on Twitter at Home of Horror Pod. Yep. Again, hit the subscribe button if you like this video on YouTube. Share it with your friends. And we're also, again, on all the podcast networks. Yep. So Amazon, Spotify, Google, Apple, all those good things. So we really appreciate you guys tuning in. We really hope you liked the episode. We're trying to get more guests on now. Yep. We realize this is kind of a driving factor in the podcast world. So we're doing our best, and we're really happy to be doing the video as well. So thanks for tuning in, guys. Matt, bring us out.
May the power of Christ compel you.
Cheers, people.
Later.
Home of Horror, the Home of Horror podcast. Home of Horror, the Home of Horror podcast. Horror podcast. So that's your third Stephen King?
Don't start with me, dude.
I bet they spent less than $50,000 on that movie.
$252,000.
Oh wow, really? Home of Horror, Home of